welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And this week on our Journey Through Dystopias, we are looking at the degradation of American cities, iconic American landscapes falling to ruin under the governments of dystopian worlds who just don't look after those iconic places. So we're looking at New York on the East Coast and LA and some other locations on the west of the country. And what are the two films that we've got lined up to look at that, James?
So to delve into this dystopian topic, we are going to be looking at Escape from New York from 1981 with the ultimate action hero Kurt Russell, and Blade Runner 2049 from 2017 with Ryan Gosling, and of course Harrison Ford makes a sneaky little appearance as well, doesn't he?
Spoilers, James, come on.
Yeah, but it's Blade Runner, everybody knew it was coming, didn't they?
Yeah, I finally watched Blade Runner 2049. I can't believe it's been 5 years since it came out, good lord. But yeah, we're finally getting into that.
That's a theme in the podcast now. Yeah. Matt going, oh, it's been ages since I've seen this film, oh, I'm getting old.
Yeah, two old men talking about films like every other bloody podcast. Anyway, we are livening things up. We've got some new blood on the show to counteract that. We're joined by Dave, Richard and Tanavi from Robby the Robot's Waiting, a fantastic sci-fi podcast. So shall we get them in and get talking about these films?
Yeah, let's do it. So welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. The hosts of Robby the Robot's Waiting, we have Richard Edwards, Tanavi Patel and Dave Bradley. How are you doing, guys? You all well?
Hey, good, thank you.
Hi, yeah, well, thank you for having us.
Good evening, hi.
Fantastic, very happy to have you on the podcast. So first off, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves and the podcast itself? So could we start with Dave first?
Yeah, for sure, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having us. So I met these fellow podcasters of Robby the Robot's Waiting when I was working on SFX magazine, basically. That's my background. So I was the editor of SFX magazine, the science fiction magazine, for 9 years, I want to say. I was maybe associated with it a little bit longer after that. I still write for the mag, in fact. But yeah, we worked together, and that's my and that's kind of my origin story for this. And then I think we all sort of moved on from SFX full time, and then recently started Robby the Robot's Waiting together during the pandemic, so in the middle of 2020. But yeah, that's how it was. My background was in magazines and media anyway, and I'd been a lifelong science fiction fan. So SFX magazine, 10 years of SFX magazine I was genetically engineered for that role, basically.
Fantastic. And what about you, Tanavi?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit different from these guys. I called myself a late bloomer to sci-fi, and was really a fan and started doing things like Comic Cons and then doing interviews there and did hosting. Through that, met some SFX guys and others, and started writing freelance for SFX as well. And yeah, that's how we met. And then we decided on the podcast after a few drinks down the pub.
That's how the best podcasts always start.
Right?
That's how ours started as well.
And the rest is history, I guess.
And Rich?
I guess kind of similar to Dave. I mean, you could look at it in some regards that Dave regenerated into me when he stopped being the editor of SFX. I became the new editor. But to kind of mess around with Doctor Who canon a little bit, I also worked with Dave a long time before that. So I was news editor and deputy editor before that. So I was on SFX for about 12 and a half years. And then about 2.5-3 years ago, I left to go freelance. So these days I still write for SFX, Total Film, Games Radar, Tech Radar, a few other things. So I still keep my hand in on sort of, I guess, geekery.
I think you still see probably all of our names pop up from time to time in either SFX magazine or sort of associated events that the science fiction fandom are at, whether that's an MCM or a Sci-Fi London or something. We're usually to be found at those things. But yeah, that's how we all came together. And in fact, there's a missing fourth Beatle, really, because at the start of the podcast, another editor of SFX magazine, Dave Golder, was one of the founder members, if you like, and recorded a couple of pilots with us. Now lost somewhere.
I've still got them. They're never going to come out.
There you go. The lost pilot, and that was with. So we had Dave Golder as well. So at one point we had him too. In fact, actually, that reminds me. One of the most memorable podcast recordings we did was when Tanavi hosted, but we had everyone who's been the editor of SFX magazine in one chat together about sort of the history of science fiction and the magazine and what have you. And we had Dave Gold, other Dave in that, but also the new editor Darren and Matt Bealby, who'd started the mag in the mid 90s, was there. So that was fun.
I now can't help but think of you all as the editors as incarnations of the Doctor now. So those those pilots where you got a lot of the editors on, are like those episodes where they, like the 5 Doctors and all of that, where they all meet up and hang out with each other.
That's fine. I mean, Dave's happy with that. I mean, that makes him Tom Baker.
Exactly. Although I think probably my Doctor is probably Peter Davison, actually, just the age I am.
Oh, so that's me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
There we go.
Oh, actually, hang on, I've got the numbers wrong. No, you'd be John Pertwee, wouldn't you? Sorry, I'm sorry, I've just messed up Doctor Who. I've just destroyed all of my sci-fi credibility in just one foul sweep.
And what are the big, within the genre of sci-fi, what are the big heavy hitters for you three? What are your favourite films or TV shows within sci-fi? Tanavi, do you want to go first?
So for me, I tend to like sort of TV superheroes, like DC.
Fantastic.
DC TV, Marvel movies. I tend to find like random like Canadian sci-fi shows and things. Like one of the big shows that got me into the fandom side of things was things like Haven, which is a random sci-fi show.
Yeah,
you know
Haven was brilliant. Yeah.
And Chuck was another big one that was sort of very formative for me. Yeah, so like Troll Hunters I was talking about the other day. So just really, those kind of things. So probably more family orientated sci-fi, if that kind of makes sense.
And I think actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What I get from when you talk about science fiction is that a lot of what you like is kind of more kind of grounded and earth-based.
Yeah, so I tend to say that is I like grounded sci-fi. Yeah, nothing too sort of alternate reality or too much in space and stuff. Although there are exceptions, of course. But yeah, grounded sci-fi.
Well, on that subject then, how do you feel about the dystopian genre? Because we've been looking at obviously lots of different dystopian films this series, and some of them are more grounded than others. How do you feel about the genre as a whole?
So again, as a whole, it's not really my cup of tea, because I think that obviously dystopian cities, the feel of those, movies and shows tends to be quite bleak, quite dark, and generally quite R-rated, and that's probably not like for me most of the time. Probably depends on the day. So for me it's as you'll find out, but it's a bit of a new thing for me to kind of delve more into dystopian worlds. I've been avoiding it slightly. I think the current world's a bit dystopian enough, so...
I know what you mean. We were sort of like umming and ahhing about whether to sort of delve into dystopia for this series, but it's what a lot of people wanted to hear, so we went with it. But it's funny how sort of like dystopia gets like, I love the way you were talking about sci-fi as well, and just like how you like some of the sort of more family orientated stuff perhaps, and then sort of like that kind of thing. Sci-fi is so good because it can be all of those things, and it can be this darker stuff as well. And like, even if you look at something like WALL-E, which is like a sort of like a family Pixar film, it's got like a little bit of dystopia in there with sort of like how societies turned out. So it's interesting how you can see all these things in dystopian fiction.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah. And I think that's one of the great things about it, is that no matter how dark and bleak things can look, you can find hopeful themes in there. Humanity rising through, and empathy coming from unusual places, and those kind of things which I can apply in any time, in any space, in any dimension. Yeah,
those are sort of like the really uplifting bits you get from some of this dystopian fiction. What about you, Rich? What is your sort of taste in sci-fi?
I think dystopian, it depends entirely on the story. I think there's some absolutely amazing dystopian films. Planet of the Apes, I love.
Yes, my favourite film.
It's such a good film. And actually the sort of more recent Planet of the Apes films as well, I think have been great. They don't start off as a dystopia, but they get there pretty quickly. And I really like Mad Max Fury Road recently. So I think if you're telling a good story, I think dystopia has a tendency to slip into cliche a little bit. I think Mad Max started this whole thing of everyone's wearing these weird sort of, I guess, sort of goth rock outfits. It's like, how did that even happen? I mean, I know it was, the sort of late 70s, early 80s when sort of punk was around, but it's like, why did everyone think, we're going to change our clothes to this? And I think when you kind of get to Waterworld, it's like, oh, we really are doing Mad Max on the water. And again, I mean, where are these clothes coming from? How are they making it?
It's like only leather survived or something.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, but then I think there's some really interesting dystopias. I mean, you mentioned WALL-E, and I actually think it's full on dystopia. I think it's on so many levels, it's such a bleak film. I mean, they find some joy in it, and WALL-E is such a wonderful character because he's finding happiness in small things, just the things that he finds among the rubbish. But look what's happened to the human race. That is miserable as, they've had to leave, that they've all expanded. It's saying that our future isn't that promising, but it's doing it in a really sort of accessible way. So that's pretty cool. As for my taste in sci-fi, unlike Tanavi, I absolutely adore space. Space is what got me there in the first place. I think I still remember, and I think this is a bit of a cliche, but just watching the original Star Wars on TV when I was a kid. I know a lot of people say about the Star Destroyer. I think for me it was R2-D2 and C-3PO on Tatooine, but also just anything to do with space. I used to watch Star Trek all the time as a kid. Star Trek: The Next Generation was such a big deal. I mean, not just because it was the only thing on in the 90s.
6 o'clock, BBC Two.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Always there. I love Babylon 5 as well. And sort of more recently... Oh, that's not quite the same. Sorry.
It's not.
Matt's been trying to get me to watch Babylon 5 for quite a while now, so you giving me another recommendation. Yeah,
one of the best. Yeah,
I think Babylon 5, actually, you watch it now, and there are bits of it that are clunky, and you can tell that it was made in the 90s, but I think it's very influential in the way that kind of TV's gone in the 21st century. The idea that you could tell a big long arc story, that characters were flawed, all the hallmarks that kind of made peak TV are in Babylon 5, and I don't think it perhaps gets the respect for that it deserves.
When I hear people saying that The Wire is like a novel for television, that it flips a switch in my head, and I can't not mention Babylon 5 and be like, well, Babylon 5 is more like a novel for television than The Wire. But then I just leave it at that because people don't want to listen to that.
But I think what Richard said, that's absolutely the point, is that if it's a good story, you'll watch it and you'll want to watch it. I've watched loads of stuff in space now, probably the recommendations of these two guys, which I absolutely love, and it's because it's just great stories.
Yeah, storytelling is the most important thing, isn't it? And we've certainly seen that this series, looking at these dystopian films, that it's the quality of the storytelling that makes the dystopian fiction work. But that is true across all sci-fi as well. But Dave, what about you? What are your sci-fi heavy hitters and thoughts on dystopian fiction in general?
Yeah, much like Richard, I am into space. I think probably the first film I saw at the cinema was Star Wars in '78, I think, when it reached the UK. But and so I love all that. Yeah, Star Trek and Babylon 5 and Battlestar Galactica and shows like that. I love Firefly, and I love Farscape and so spaceships and good stories good stories set in space are do it for me as well. I like superhero shows too. Tanavi and I are both watchers of like the Arrowverse and things. I love all that, and I do like my superheroes. But yeah, I think it's about space. But dystopias, I do like good dystopian fiction as well. I was just remembering actually, interestingly, when I was studying for my it was probably my GCSE or something in English, and we had to do one of those sort of personal studies. I don't know whether you remember having to do a similar kind of thing. You got to read some books and write about them. I chose to write about the collapse of civilization. That's what I chose to write about. And that included like the Day of the Triffids. That included 1984, and it included. In fact, I even went back to Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities as well, because that's actually a pretty dystopian vision, actually, from Britain in the 19th century, about the 18th century. Pretty incredible. So all that, and then on screen, I love all that. I think I probably got a lot of time for films like Children of Men, which I think occasionally comes up but doesn't get as much credit as it is. I think it's just such a well-made film, in a really really spooky vision of how things could turn out. So I find myself drawn to kind of dystopias, I guess. Sometimes perhaps when they're sort of allegorical, that kind of 1984 or Brave New World thing, when they're shining light on us, and sometimes just because they're fantastic settings for the survival of the human spirit, and just kind of that's why they kind of end up being the backgrounds to, I guess, to kind of a lot of young adult stuff, the Hunger Games and things, because they're a great backdrop, both sort of, I guess, as an analogy, but also for for the chance for to show rebellion and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm well into it. Yeah, love it.
Fantastic. Well, we have two dystopian films we're going to be talking about today, and the first one's a little bit lighter than some of the other dystopian films out there. Let's talk about John Carpenter's Escape from New York.
1988. The crime rate in the United States rises 400%. 1991. The United States Police Force is formed. 1997. New York City is a walled maximum security prison. John Carpenter's Escape from New York.
So what's your relationship with this film? Do you remember seeing it? Did any of you see it at the cinema, or do you remember when you first saw this film?
I didn't see it at the cinema. I kind of wish I had. I saw it on the small screen. I think probably I was a student at the time, so I came to it kind of quite late. I think it's probably not the first of the John Carpenter's films that I saw. I definitely remember seeing Halloween first, and The Thing, of course. He's amazing. I remember, and I think I probably was on a bit of a John Carpenter binge when I was at university, because I seem to recall seeing them all in the space of a very short amount of time, including probably on the same sort of TV we had when I was a student. So I remember seeing the Thing and so on. But I really like it. One of the things that always captures you right from the off, right, with John Carpenter's films is just the music. And now, having rewatched it again so that we could talk about it today, I can't get the tune out of my head. It's like, it'll be the same if I watch Halloween now. That'll be rattling around my head for days.
Because he does like club nights as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, and there was a 6 music special on him. I think, as a composer, he's absolutely brilliant. And I think what shows how brilliant it is if you watch The Thing, which is an Ennio Morricone score, he's actually riffing off John Carpenter in it. This is one of the greatest movie composers of all time, and he's inspired by Carpenter. So the way Carpenter gets so much out of, really, he's almost like one finger synth playing, isn't he?
I think even in the 1980s, whenever The Thing came out, if you're coming on as the composer for a John Carpenter film, you have to, whoever you are, whoever you may be, whatever fame you may be bringing, you've got to kind of respect that there's a tone visually that matches up perfectly with his audio tones, and you've got to respect that and kind of do the same thing with your soundtrack, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. Tanavi, was this the first time you'd seen Escape from New York?
How did you know? So, to be fair, I'd seen snippets of it, and I think that's because it is so iconic in many ways. And so it's kind of hard not to come across it. But yeah, I think I'd seen snippets of it. But this is my first time sort of sitting down and watching it fully for the podcast. And I was surprised. I think I was expecting it to be more of a, fully into sort of the horror genre, and it actually felt a little bit like a comic book movie, a bit less scary, more quirky, I would say. And absolutely, from the opening sequence, it's just that sort of black slides with the foreboding music. It's a great start. Like the sort of impression of Kurt Russell with his eye patch straight away. I loved it. And I was like, oh, brilliant. There's going to be pirates. But then, obviously like the exposition at the beginning, and I'm thinking, of all the islands in America to choose as a prison, why New York? That seems like a really difficult one to make into a prison. I don't know, but it looked great.
That's an interesting fact, because this was actually the first time my wife had seen it, and we watched it together, and she said to me exactly that. What a ridiculous idea! And the thing that I kind of rather pompously pointed out to her, as I want to do, is that it's not a satire of of the prison system. It's a satire of New York crime. So it has to be set in New York, because that's how you talk about New York crime. So she went, I think the prison population of America is like 2.6 million. They never fit in New York, which is a very good point. But it's not a practical solution for crime. It's a satire of New York.
Yeah, because John Carpenter wrote it as sort of like a comment on the Watergate scandal, didn't he? I read. So it's got all this kind of background about sort of like the politics that was going on at the time, and everyone's comparing Donald Pleasant's character to Nixon. So it's got all of that kind of stuff to it, as well as sort of like the sort of like the prison setting. So I found all that kind of stuff really interesting when I found out about that.
It's interesting with Pleasance as the president, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It's when this was out in the 70s and 80s, New York was the murder capital of the world, I think, briefly, and certainly was suffered from a huge crime rate, and there's a lot's been written about what they did to deal with that. The various measures that they took to combat that, including the weirdest one that you might have read. I can't remember where this was. It might have been in Freakonomics or something like that. But basically, they said that one of the things that brought the crime rate down in New York was taking the lead out of petrol. There's now this theory that lead in petrol makes you aggressive. It's one of the reasons why it's so bad. And so there's a whole bunch of theories about how they managed to calm New York down from the 90s onwards. But now it's actually relatively safe as big cities go. But at the time there was this huge moral panic about how what a terrible place New York was to live in, and it was one of the worst cities in the world. So it's in that backdrop as well, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, but that was funny because my second thought was, well, why did the crime rate go up 400%?
Right, yeah.
They never explain that at all, or what you need to do in order to sort of land yourself in New York prison. But I guess that makes sense now because I'm thinking of it with a modern mind. But actually, back in those days, I suppose it was quite a hot topic about the crime rates in America.
Yeah, there would have been a lot of constant news about what the crime rate is. I'll be completely honest with you, I don't know how crime rate is measured. I don't know what the rate is.
Well, yeah.
But a 400% increase, I think, like that will communicate very quickly, wouldn't it? And I did, it's done like text on screen, like the amount of text on screen we've seen at the start of dystopian movies this series, it's a necessary evil of the genre. But yeah, putting that on screen, it immediately says quite a lot quite quickly for a film made at this time, I guess. That's kind of it was lost on me. Like, I know some of that about New York, but it's just stuff I've absorbed from TV and film. It's like I didn't know that kind of detail of it, and it's not an immediate like reference point for me when I see a film from this period set in New York necessarily.
It reminds me of we looked at RoboCop in one of our previous series, and like that was sort of like off the back of like the Detroit crime rate and sort of the Devil's Night stuff that was going on there. So it's quite interesting that sort of seeing that sort of real life kind of dystopian stuff happening sort of feeds back into sci-fi. So it's quite nice to see how the zeitgeist is working with those kind of films.
Yeah, absolutely. RoboCop's another great example there, isn't it? Yeah, of the idea of violent crime. We just mentioned some of the dystopias you mentioned there, Rich, as well, about that kind of Mad Max thing. Sort of came out at the same period.
I'm going to be controversial because I think this is actually quite an overrated movie, and I say that as a big John Carpenter fan. And I actually think when he made this, it was 81. He was on one of the great runs of directors. He'd made. Dark Star is a very interesting kind of low budget movie. Beach Ball Alien, he gets away with it. Someone surfing into some kind of black hole with a weird 2001 weight, he gets away with it. And you've got Assault on Precinct 13, you've got Halloween, you've got The Fog, and then just after this, you've got The Thing, which I think is his masterpiece. And this, I kind of think it's a poster turned into a movie. You've got Snake Plissken, who is an amazing image, this kind of guy who doesn't say very much, just trying to be cool all the time and almost trying too hard. This idea of New York as a prison, it sounds cool on paper. I don't think it quite works. And I think it's just, it feels to me like a film that was made to be a cult movie, and has become it. And I don't love it like a lot of other people do. I would much rather watch Big Trouble in Little China, which is this later movie, which is utterly mad and not, on many levels not a great movie. But I think it's more fun than this. It was one of those movies when I was at uni, it's like, I need to watch this. And I kind of, apart from the music, I've never really loved it. But I think there's loads of interesting stuff to talk about in it.
I kind of absorbed it in a similar way to you, Dave and Rich. At uni, binge watching Carpenter films, and then I kind of forgot about it, and then this was kind of coming back to it. I do think it's good, but I think that's a valid criticism, Rich. I think that it's interesting that like Carpenter's best films, in my opinion, are when they're very, very simple. The simpler the better. He's really, really good at that. But he can do like big films as well. And this kind of feels like it's caught halfway in between. Like it's got a bigger scope, but it's got quite a small feel to it as you're just kind of in these scummy environments going from place to place with Snake. There's real simplicity there, but the ideas are quite big in scope, and it doesn't quite land comfortably on either side of that fence. And that, I mean, ultimately, I think it just makes it a bit less memorable than some of his better films.
It's interesting you say about the scope there, because he's a very ambitious film for a film that doesn't have that much budget. You know, look at the way they do Manhattan. I mean, there's some really clever tricks they use, like using the wireframes, you know, when they're kind of coming out, you know, they're showing skyscrapers, like when he's approaching. They don't actually show approaches or things happening, that they're doing it with these or sort of faux computer graphics. And, you know, he's being very clever about how he sort of shows this Manhattan, but at the same time, I don't think it's quite got enough scale to do what it needs to. It's as you say, it's kind of caught in the middle.
Well, let's talk about that then, because the theme of this episode today is these American landscapes and how they are degraded and destroyed in dystopias. What's the impact of setting this film in New York and having it be totally a prison, but then not even really showing it? Like, I don't think we actually see the Statue of Liberty, but it makes up it's the poster basically, but I don't think we actually see it, although we see Liberty Island, and then we just use all these wireframes. What is the impact of doing this to New York on screen?
I'll tell you one thing, isn't it weird looking at it now, post 9/11, and seeing a plane fly directly towards New York, and the image of the Twin Towers as being the first thing that they show you on the screen. It's funny how your own experience of news since causes a visceral reaction when you see stuff like that on screen, isn't it? Because those things don't have, you know, at the time didn't have anything, you know, they're just plot devices.
Well, that's an interesting thing to pick up on, because we don't need to explain why 9/11 was a shocking event, but is there something about crashing a plane into the skyscrapers of New York years before 9/11 happened, but is realising that on screen and using what a shocking image that just naturally feels like, and then just kind of doing it. It's like it's right at the start of the movie, and it's not really a major event. It's the thing that kind of begins things going, but it's not like, well, there's no budget to have it be a huge disaster on screen, I guess.
but you're right, though. The plane is less important than where the president is. That's the whole point. New York, and certainly Manhattan, is just an amazing starting point for a movie. You know, it's the most iconic skyline in the world. You know, even if you've not been to New York, you know New York, and it's kind of the cultural center of the US. You know, Broadway and all that. You know, it's the financial center. There's so much activity there. And so much wealth as well, you know, and by turning it into a prison, you kind of got the sense of that in the background, but it's kind of all faded. So I think, you know, often dystopias are powerful when we've got these recognizable images, but, you know, some films throw a bit of moss on it through sort of like 12 Monkeys had some animals wandering around, but, you know, that kind of juxtaposition between, you know, what we know and it looks familiar, but given that kind of twist and saying, oh, well, this is all fallen apart, you know, that is always going to be powerful.
Yeah. I mean, even the fact that they're essentially, there's that moment where Snake walks in and they're performing theatre, and, you know, in New York, but it's just so different
Broadway
to like the Broadway. Exactly. Because we don't even learn about what the world outside of New York is, so we don't know whether it's similar or not.
I mean, there's just hints at World War, isn't there? You know, the tensions with China and the Soviet Union, I think. Yeah,
and so we know clearly it's not great, and there's probably a level of dystopia even outside of the walls of New York, but yeah, it wouldn't work the same if it wasn't that.
Yeah, I think they're doing a lot with using that iconic setting. Having Broadway in there in plays, I hadn't really clocked that, but you're absolutely right. That's like the tropes of New York are kind of all a part of the film.
Yeah, the yellow cab as well, right? That's
absolutely
having the cabbie in there as well. Yeah, I love that. That's all. And yeah, even though it's just wireframe mostly, we're seeing quite a lot of the iconic landscape, and that in large part is made up of the two towers because they were a huge part of the landscape. And yeah, just constantly reminding us of that, I think, throughout the film to just show us how everything's gone to pot for New York. And I think there's something there about, like, you can assume there's an extension that things have gone to pot for America as well. I don't know if that's a particularly British thing to say, but New York is, to me, very representative of America. It's like, it's the iconic American city. So if you turn all of that into a prison, especially to me as a Brit watching it, that says an awful lot about America in general in the world of the film. But I did wonder if like some of these things were lost on us, maybe because we're not American, and that skyline means something different to us.
I think the fact that Liberty Island is a security checkpoint is is quite a stark sort of juxtaposition again. But yeah, I mean, it's a good question. What would an American make of it at that time, watching it at that time? I think it's probably more modern view of it, looking back at it, that makes it more of a stark contrast.
Yeah, because I think the only other thing we see in the film is the sort of police stay outside. So you see sort of like the contrast between sort of like the degradation of New York, and then you see all the guys in the police station with like their flashing machines and stuff like that. So you've got that kind of juxtaposition there, which is quite interesting. And the fact that it is a police state as well, I think that says a lot, doesn't it?
Right.
Sort of like about, and also like it's quite relatable now still, just with everything that's been going on sort of like with the police in America and sort of like all of that stuff. So it's like, it's interesting that those sort of things have remained, and they still sort of like, they're still relatable to sort of how we perceive New York now to an extent.
Have you seen the film 21 Bridges with Chadwick Boseman in it?
No.
Which came out just a couple of years ago. Well, the interesting thing about that is that it's very much not a science fiction film. It's a cop film. But there's a crime is carried out in Manhattan, and no spoilers. And basically they lock down all the bridges, so it's impossible to get off the island. There's 21 bridges. That's the name of the film. And so basically for 24 hours, it becomes a prison where they're the cops, so they have to solve the crime. They have to solve the crime and clean up this problem in 24 hours before the bridges open again. And it's odd, and it takes place overnight as well, so it's all dark too. So although it's not a dystopian science fiction film per se, it's interesting that it's sort of riffing off the same idea that you can kind of lock Manhattan down, and that's where all the bad stuff happens. And that's where it is.
Bad neighborhood, Snake. You don't want to be walking from the Bowery to 42nd Street at night. I've been driving a cab here for 30 years, and I'm telling you, you don't walk around here at night. Yes, sir. He'll kill you and strip you in 10 seconds flat. Usually I'm not down around here myself, but I wanted to catch that show. This stuff is like gold around here, you know. It's like gold.
Also, like, the people in New York are quite an interesting mix as well. And we're talking about sort of like what New York's like. What did you think of sort of the people that made up this sort of prison? What did you think about this ensemble cast?
I think there is a little bit of the Mad Max in it, that they're kind of intentionally weirding it up. I mean, that first guy that they meet, he reminded me of Pickle in Nightmare, you know, the elf. I mean, I'm sure it maybe he influenced Pickle in Nightmare, but, you know, this sort of, I don't know what it is. It's kind of this weird punk elf sheep. And there's I feel like there's a few bits where people, they're just trying a little bit too hard. You know, people are like being a little bit too zany with it. You know, this is saying, and I'm like, would criminals really do that? I mean, I know that they're free, but would that be their priority? I don't know. It's like Mad Max. Yeah, we're trying really hard to show that the world has changed, and I think it makes some of the characters not that believable. I mean, I think, you know, as has been said, it is quite a cartoony film, but they're pushed a little bit too far. It's
shorthand, though, isn't it? It's to do that silliness with it, with all that hairspray.
I mean, the short. I mean, that's sort of infinitesimal.
Yeah.
I kept thinking he looked like Rufio in Hook, just with his hair.
Yes. I think when we look at it and it looks so ridiculous, I then have to remember that it was the 80s, and so even like that hair might have been cool. And the fact that you'd pimp out a Cadillac with chandeliers.
I thought it was amazing, by the way.
I do like that. Yeah.
So I don't know. It was a very different time.
The chandeliers on the Cadillac are a great image, though, aren't they? It just rolls up. There's something about the people in New York. They refer to this really sort of obliquely early on. I think Lee Van Cleef's character says it, that someone's got petrol, and you see there's a great image of the sort of petrol, the drill, inside one of the rooms in New York, and they've got some people have got generators, and they've got this. That there's clearly some ingenuity going on there. You know, there are obviously for all the crazies that they call them and so on in there, they've clearly got engineers and miners and electricians and things in there somehow. And I think that's.
Well, electricians sometimes break the law too.
It's that one time the one guy, he was building oil derricks and he accidentally committed manslaughter, ended up in New York, and how can I repurpose my skills?
and maybe some of them were left behind when it got turned into a prison.
Right. That's a really good point. Where are all the people from Manhattan? It's an interesting point. I remember seeing this documentary about prisons one time, and someone had pointed out that a lot of people end up in maximum security prisons for one act of violence. Maybe they act of jealousy and they end up killing a rival lover or something, and they go to prison for murder. And so actually, there's quite a lot of people in particularly in kind of prisons where murderers go who aren't inherently kind of hard career criminals. And so I can presume that in this scenario you've got presumably there were teachers in there, and there are computer programmers and dental hygienists or whatever else ends up in things that have got to find an outlet for what they do.
Yeah, like the cabbie.
Yeah, I was just going to say the cabbie. Yeah, he
Yeah.
must be an example of that, because he says he's been driving a cab there his whole life, but obviously he didn't just remain a cabbie there when it turned into a national prison. He did something, but yeah, he doesn't seem like the worst guy in there. Well, he's definitely not the worst guy in there, but we don't know what thing he did that got him in there. But yeah, like all of those people are coming together, and a society is reforming within the prison. So you kind of got, I guess there's kind of two dystopias working here, aren't there? There's the police state of America that created the Manhattan prison, and then a microcosm of just gang warfare, I guess, reconstituting itself as a society.
I mean, to me, it seemed slightly devolved in that it felt like when you enter New York, you enter a jungle, and there's tribes, essentially, sort of a tribal warfare, and that's what felt most familiar to me in that respect. So I don't know, maybe like the Duke's tribe and sort of the brain side of things. I don't know. But it's at the same time, everyone's a little bit crazy, and it's kind of difficult to know, for example, where their allegiances lie and what they all do. And yeah, you don't really get much of an explanation of it all. And even the underground guy, it's like people pulling
that's creepy,
down
right?
into what was that? I know.
Yeah, that's a good scary image.
That was a nice touch to just have that quite briefly, because they get explained, I think, in dialogue at the start of the film. So there's a little bit of hype there for them, but we do just get a relatively brief scene of them, and yeah, they're just a sort of wave of terror that washes over the characters and then are gone. That's a nice bit of world building there. We talked a lot about world building in dystopias, and obviously a lot of it has to be done in the opening crawl of a lot of these films. But little references like that, where you see that like there's a whole other group of people over here, and you can infer what's going on with them, and they're scary. But we don't actually. They're not part of the plot, so we're not going to dwell on them. They're just in the background.
I'm not a fool, Pliskin.
Call me Snake.
S.D. Pliskin. American, Lieutenant, Special Forces Unit Black Light. 2 Purple Hearts, Leningrad and Siberia. Youngest man to be decorated by the President. You robbed the Federal Reserve Depository. Life sentence, New York Maximum Security Penitentiary. I'm ready to kick your ass out of the world, war hero.
What were your thoughts on Snake then as the hero of the piece? So we've talked about these gangs and society that's rebuilding itself, but the way we experience that is through Snake's odyssey through New York. He's pretty iconic, isn't he?
First thing I thought about was Metal Gear Solid. Like, I don't know if you guys...
Right, the Solid Snake.
Yeah, straight away. That's how I know Snake Plissken.
Snake, what happened? Snake! Snake!
Also, I heard he was dead.
You can't say that. As soon as you say that, you get killed off.
He's very famous, isn't he? They all know who he is.
They do all know him.
Yeah.
He is such a cartoon. That's the thing, unashamedly a cartoon. And, there's really not very much to this guy. I mean, Kurt Russell just comes in and growls his way through the film. The eye patch, that helps, I guess. Give him a snake tattoo just to kind of make the point that he is called Snake Plissken. Call me Snake. They're obviously. I think Carpenter's obviously trying to make him kind of the Western type hero. That kind of man with no name vibe. And I mean, even casting Lee Van Cleef from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as the sort of cop, as Hulk. That's sort of showing it, but. I guess they, part of this thing, that idea of making a cult movie of, I guess, almost an exploitation movie, that he is, he's meant to be, I guess, two-dimensional. He's not meant to evolve through the movie. He just appears as this fully formed rogue, and he kind of exits the movie shorn of his explosives in his neck, but still the same guy.
Am I right in thinking that his final moments, he tears up the tape that could actually help world peace? If I've been following the plot correctly.
Yeah, that was something I was like,
what?
Yeah.
That's your character development there.
It's a good visual gag. And presence with the music in the background and everything, but what? What has he done?
Yeah, not much in the way of character development. Like, do any of you have an interpretation of the fact that he says, call me Plissken at the end of the film? So Rich, you just said, like, call me Snake. Like, that's the whole thing in the start of the film. And then at the end of the film, he does get called Snake and he goes, call me Plissken. Is that just purely...
I think, he's totally trolling Hulk, right? That's how I took it.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely, I assume that was the case. There's a little bit of it that maybe I assumed that since he's sort of earned his freedom, he was assuming a bit of a civilian identity again as he goes off screen. Doesn't need his prison name anymore, kind of thing. Always his special forces name. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, he's totally just sticking a finger up at Lee Van Cleef, isn't he?
I wish he'd said, "Call me Mr. Plissken."
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's part of that Western theme to it, isn't it? The way that he, the emphasis on his name. The Duke with his cowboy hat, the whole, the way they feel like it's going to be pistols at dawn, basically. It's definitely got that vibe to it.
Yeah, and he's a heroic figure. He's on the same side as Hulk, but that Western trope of just being obeying your own rules, and I'm the good guy, but that doesn't mean I'm working for the lawman. I guess that's what he's doing.
That's an interesting point, I think. Is he a hero? I mean, he's definitely an anti-hero, but is he heroic at all? Because everything he does really is for self-preservation.
Saves himself, he wouldn't have done it without the things in his neck.
Well, it's kind of unfair, isn't it, to judge him because they put the things in his neck. So, like, he doesn't actually get an opportunity to be outright heroic, I guess.
Well, I think that moment that he has with Donald Pleasance as the president, asking him, what do you care that all these people died helping you, trying to save you? And, he shows that humanity. And then he goes and destroys the tape. And I don't know what to think about that. Because he could have been in that moment... He could have been the hero, the anti-hero that you want him to be, remembering the people that lost their lives, showing that he has that humanity. And then he just, in a petty move, just decides to not help the rest of the world.
Well, I suppose he's a product of the world he lives in, isn't he? Because that when he's asking those questions, when he's asking the president, he's showing humanity by caring about all those people who died. He's trying to see if the leader of the free world is going to show any humanity to the people who died, and he doesn't really. And presumably that's why he destroys the tape and stitches him up like that, and causes the end of the world. I know there's a sequel, but it's vague what's going to happen. But yeah,
I don't know. Is that canon though? That sequel? I mean, I think it's been. Has it been disowned? I don't know.
Has it? Oh,
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's not. It's never been very highly regarded, has it?
Well, speaking of sequels, and hopefully a sequel that is not going to be disowned by the creators and will be remembered well for years to come. Shall we move on to Blade Runner 2049 from 2017 by Denis Villeneuve? And I hope I'm saying that right finally after talking about him so much on the podcast.
I still can't believe that you haven't seen Blade Runner 2049, Matt. I'm very excited to get into that chat, but I'm also thinking, like, how many other sci-fi films have you not had a chance to see? There must be, like, I mean, there's so many. You must have a few sort of big, heavy hitters on your list.
No, I've seen loads, James. I'm a good sci-fi fan. No, I mean, there are lots, unfortunately. I'm a busy man, okay, and I don't like long movies, which is why I hadn't got around to Blade Runner 2049 yet, despite how much I love Denis Villeneuve. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a few. I mean, a big gap for me was the Planet of the Apes series. I know they're not like the biggest movies ever, but they are kind of a cultural icon, aren't they? So it's been huge fun for me to go back to them over on patreon.com/journey through sci-fi. We've been revisiting those because they're your favourite movies. But if I can flip it back on you, James, I think at some point we need to cover the Star Trek movies. I feel like you haven't seen every Star Trek movie, have you?
No, there's definitely gaps in my Star Trek knowledge. So yeah, I'll definitely be up for sort of chatting through those on Patreon. It sounds like a good call.
Yeah, some of those films are amazing and some of them are awful, James. And I really look forward to at some point going through those movies. Hey, listeners, if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can head on over to our Patreon and join and listen to the Apes episodes now. And if you want to hear Star Trek episodes in the future, hey, join and let us know, because we need to set up a new mini-series soon. So you can influence the decision there.
Yeah, let us know what your favourite films are, what your favourite film series are, and then hopefully on Patreon, we can cover them over there.
All right, come on, let's not waste any more time, James. We need to talk about Blade Runner 2049 with Dave, Richard and Tanavi.
Every civilization was built off the back of a disposable workforce. But I can only make so many. Happy birthday.
There is an order to things. That's what we do here. We keep order. The world is built on a wall that separates kind. Tell either side there's no wall, you bought a war.
You're a cop. I did your job once. I was good at it.
So, what did you guys first think when you heard that they were doing a Blade Runner sequel? Like, I know it got lots of mixed reactions to start off with. Everyone was like, are you really going to do a Blade Runner sequel? But, I mean, it's in capable hands. What did you guys think? So, starting with Dave, what did you think when you first heard the news?
I remember being surprised because it's, a large passage of time had occurred after the original, and legacy sequels can be problematic, and they're sometimes a bit of a nostalgia grab rather than having anything to add to it. But I tend to be kind of quite, what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say forgiving, but that's not a very useful word. And more, I tend to have a bit of an open mind about sequels and reboots and remakes. Things tend to stand on their own, and Hollywood has a long tradition of making really good sequels or really good follow-ups. There's equally some terrible ones, but as we just said, Escape from Los Angeles. But equally, there's some great kind of retreads of films that have added to the story. And in fact, we were just talking about John Carpenter's The Thing, but of course, The Thing would never have existed if it wasn't remaking The Thing from Another World, which was itself, an adaptation of Who Goes There and so on. So, whenever I hear that someone's revisiting a story, I tend to try to keep an open mind. But a lot of time had passed, and Blade Runner feels such a the work of one person's vision, and it's got that unusual Vangelis soundtrack and so on, that they would have had to do something pretty special, and I think they did. I quite like this. I don't know, what did you guys think?
Well, I think as a sequel to Blade Runner goes, I don't think we could have hoped for anything better. I mean, I was quite skeptical just about the idea, because I don't think the original movie needs a sequel. It finishes in a really cool way. It's a standalone movie. And it's sort of like, well, how are they going to follow this? And actually, there's not very much story to the first movie. So it's like, where do you go from here? When Denis Villeneuve was announced, you're thinking, actually, this could be a guy to do it, because, he'd made Arrival at this point, which is, fantastic sci-fi movie. And he proved it with Blade Runner and has since gone on to prove it again with Dune. He takes science fiction seriously. There's no effort to dumb it down. He doesn't insert gags to make it, I guess, palatable for non-sci-fi fans. And I think what they did here was not just make a sequel in terms of story in a really clever way by sort of pushing it forward 30 years, but also it's kind of a sequel in terms of mood. The first Blade Runner is so about atmosphere, and he manages to capture that kind of vibe in this film, which I think is absolutely incredible.
Tanavi, how about you? What were your thoughts when this was in the making?
Yeah, I was like, I need to go watch the first one again. It had been a while, and again, it's for me. I wasn't sure they needed another one really, but I'm really glad they made it. And like Dave says, I think we are in the time of sequels, and especially for a big epic sci-fi film, to see it done now with sort of modern CGI and sci-fi capabilities, I think that always makes it interesting. And the coupling of Ryan Gosling and Harrison Ford, I was looking forward to as well, although we don't see Harrison Ford for like the first half of the movie. And again, I actually really enjoyed it. I think there was a lot of good points to it.
I'm a big fan of this one, and I've been trying to get Matt to watch this for a while. This has been on the list when we talked about the first one a few series back, and I was like, I could not talk about any of it with him just in case I gave away any spoilers. So finally getting to talk to Matt about this is going to be interesting. So Matt, what were your thoughts on this then?
Oh yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a great sequel. I thought I really like Denis Villeneuve. I think that he's done a great job. I agree that the first one's like so perfect and so complete that just the very concept of 2049 was a bit. Well, it put me off, but that wasn't the reason I didn't watch it. I mean, primarily because it was nearly 3 hours long that I never got around to watching it. But I'm glad I finally did. It's a great movie. It made me want to watch it again, and it fully lives up to the original. I don't think it's not as good as the original, but it fully lives up to it and honours it and takes it forward in the appropriate way. I was very happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, it takes it forward 30 years, doesn't it, after the events of the last one? Yeah. So, what did you all think about how the world's changed? Because it's like the way the replicants are treated is different as well, isn't it? They're no longer just the hunted replicants. You've got replicants which are being controlled by the police and by Wallace's organisation. What did you think about sort of like how the world has changed? What did you think, Rich?
I think they're very smart in the way that they sort of insert this backstory about an uprising, I think in the 2020s, which I think was done, that they covered in an animated movie that came out, some anime that came out before the film, and that they've had to rethink the relationship with replicants and I guess make them more less free thinking, and obviously that's had consequences. The Tyrell Corporation, which was very big, collapsed, and you've had this Neander Wallace who's come in, and I think in terms of world building, it's very smart because a lot of it happens off screen. You just get the odd line that's talking about people, living off world, or that Neander Wallace has sort of solved world hunger. You're kind of aware of this, and yet there's this. You're getting a sense of, I guess, different classes of society. There's the humans, and then there's the replicants, and then by introducing the Joy character, the kind of played by Ana de Armas, I guss a projection, a kind of AI who's almost another class again, next to Kay the replicant. So it's really very much a film about class done with robots.
Yeah, I think that's such a key component of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of, this is a massive oversimplification, but it often felt to me, certainly when I watched this the very first time when I saw it when it came out on the big screen, the first Blade Runner is kind of about a relationship between two people who don't know that they're not human, whereas this film is about a relationship between two people who are convinced they're not human, if you know what I mean. It's almost the opposite of the relationship between Deckard and Rachel, in that they start from the position of not believing that what they've got is real. And I think that's interesting, just the perceptions of the replicants of themselves.
Well, I think, on that point, I think it's the fact that Deckard in the original movie you know, he thinks he's human but might be a replicant. And obviously with Kay, Gosling's character, he thinks he's a replicant but might be human. So they've just flipped it, but it works really well.
Yeah, they do a lot of flipping in this, don't they? Because there's lots of sort of like odes to the original without being too derivative of the original stuff. So like even the fact that Deckard has made like a model of a horse, and then that sort of like references the unicorn stuff in the first one. There's lots of little things like that. Were there any bits like that you spotted that sort of like made you think of the original, but in an interesting way, as opposed to being just a like a copy?
There's lots of kind of the interface of a lot of the software seems to be the same kind of zoom in, hold there, level 9. Yeah.
And I think the way that they search for the replicants as well, you know, they've taken that, obviously that theme again and used it, but in a different way.
Yeah, and the fact that Kay's a replicant
Exactly.
and he's a Blade Runner. So yeah, it's very clever the way they've thrown that in.
I quite like the fact that they've kept the original's police crime investigation story and the kind of the very analog methods of investigation that are used that are mixed in with the very futuristic stuff as well. It feels like a cop film still, a noir film.
And actually, I'd say it's a better detective movie than the first one. I think he does a lot more detective. I mean, Harrison Ford famously said, "I'm playing a detective who doesn't do any detecting." And actually, here he really does. And it's actually an interesting case. It's twisty. And the way that he kind of becomes embroiled in the case and thinks that he's the subject is very, very clever. I think Kay is a brilliant character in this. I think Ryan Gosling is perfect for the role. I think he's very good at doing, and I don't mean this as an insult, he's very good at doing blank or sort of you know, the way he played Neil Armstrong in First Man, you know, and this is a very similar performance. And you know, they don't waste any time saying he's a replicant. You know, I think it's first 5 minutes you find out in his fight with Dave Bautista. Which is weird because I remember when the film came out, journalists were being asked not to say that he's a replicant, and you know nothing about the storyline about the child. And it's like, well, how do you talk? I mean, first of all, the replicant thing is right at the beginning, and secondly, how do you talk about this movie without the baby plot? Because this is. I mean, that's the MacGuffin of the movie. It's the whole drive of the story.
Do you know what I have to say, as someone who was just watching it for the first time in 2021, I'm actually kind of grateful that the journalists weren't allowed to talk about that, because I didn't know any of the plot. I didn't know that. The only thing I knew was that Harrison Ford was going to be in it, and it's a great shame that Harrison Ford had to have second billing and be on the poster, because Tanavi, you were saying he doesn't show up till halfway through. Yep. It would have been amazing if you didn't know he was going to be in it.
He really doesn't make an effort with his clothes either.
He just wandered in.
He's got his beige Primark shirt on.
Yeah. I remember the photos first came in, like, we're thinking, is he? He's not in costume, is he? He's just in his civvies.
He looks right for someone who's just been shuffling around a dilapidated Vegas for the best part of 30 years, doesn't he? He's given up on the cool trench coat.
On that note, the fact that we find him in Vegas is interesting, because unlike, I guess, the original film, this takes us to other parts of America. Admittedly, you know, not too far from Los Angeles, but you know, Vegas and San Diego, which rather cruelly is just a dump. I don't know if that's supposed to be a commentary on San Diego. I don't dislike San Diego, but there you go. But you know, it takes, and they've all got their distinct color palettes and so on, and so you get a bit of a sense of the wider territory around Los Angeles from this film.
I'm just surprised that Vegas didn't become the dump.
Right.
You know?
Well, Vegas is sort of a terrifying wasteland, isn't it?
Yeah, that radioactive wasteland, and it's astonishing, isn't it? Those big figures, that sort of that sort of faded decadence. I think that some of the visions, you can freeze any sort of scene from the film, and it just looks extraordinary, doesn't it?
I think that's a really interesting thing about this film is that, you know, the first Blade Runner is held up as this, I guess, standard of dystopian cinema, how you create a future world. You know, it's kind of like Ridley Scott did with Alien. It's like, if you're making another sort of space monster film, how far do you deviate with Alien? Because Alien did it so well. And there's that same thing with Blade Runner. And what Denis Villeneuve does here is he kind of pushes it on a bit, but also because he's making the film in 2017 rather than 1982, he's got all of that CG, all of that effects sort of know-how to make it just feel so big. You know, it's a film made for the cinema, and just that shot of the sea wall with the waves bashing against it, it's incredible. And bringing in the holographic projections, which feels like a logical progression from all the neon and stuff in the first movie. It's scale plus ideas plus brilliant execution. I could just sit and watch it.
And they keep the pacing as well, which it sort of allows you to take a moment to just take it all in as you're watching it.
He's very good at that, isn't he, Villeneuve? He's clearly very proud of what he makes, and he likes to show it off, which he deserves to do, I think. And
he's paying homage to the original as well. Like even you, Rich, talking about the sort of the waves and the sea scenes, and there's like snow in here, and it's all sort of like it's mirroring the Tears in Rain scene in the original film. So it's like little things like that, which aren't sort of, again, they're not direct. He's not got a scene where they're in the rain, but this time there's a big battle in the sea, and it's sort of similar, but it's flipped on its head a little bit. So I love that kind of like he's adding his own kind of spin into it, but still keeping it sort of true to the original in some way.
Yeah, taking the imagery of it and the iconography of it, and just playing around with that and going with the spirit of that.
And that idea of like progressing it as well. I think there's something in I was watching both these films thinking about the cities that they're set in, and dystopias as well, because that's kind of the context we've been doing this series in, so it's lodged in my brain a bit. But like progressing the kind of the decay and the gloom that's in the first film in Los Angeles, and then going out of Los Angeles and showing us San Diego and Las Vegas. It's a very different visual decay, but decay has set in both those cities in different ways. So we're seeing more of America, and it's just like miserable and falling to bits and in various different ways. So it kind of felt like the whole of America, and then I guess by extension Earth in this universe, is just what remains after everyone's gone off world. And this dystopian society, again, another society that's trying to like reconstitute itself and work in the absence of wherever society went. It looks like this. It looks like Los Angeles, or it's just a scrap heap like San Diego, or just a radioactive cloud like Vegas.
The world is built on a wall that separates kind. Tell either side there's no wall, you bought a war. Or a slaughter. So what you saw didn't happen.
But it's that class divide as well, isn't it? That's in here, which is quite interesting. But they flipped it where it's the replicants and the humans. But you're kind of on the side of the replicants in the first film to a degree by the end of it. But with this, you're really sort of like seeing this thing that happens again in dystopian fictions again and again, where you've got sort of like the haves and the have-nots. And they've sort of really sort of like expanded on that, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, it's clear that even the people who live in the same apartment block and share the same lifestyle and life as Kay kind of hate him, and they graffiti on his door and they spit at him, and so clearly there's an incredible amount of prejudice there, which could be a satire on sort of immigrant class or working class, or people who do jobs that we don't like, or all sorts of things. It's interesting because the fact that the part of the plot of the film is something that would break down the barriers between replicants and humans. I mean, that's a big driving thing of it. That's the thing. Everyone is so convinced, one side or the other, that's kind of a momentous thing and a terrible thing. In fact, the humans are terrified that this information will get out. And it's kind of it clearly is a huge thing that someone's maybe built an artificial life form that can procreate, but it seems to be again a sort of more of a they fear a sort of moral panic rather than the thing, because the villains, if you like, the kind of the love who functions on behalf of the Wallace Institute is clearly kind of horrifying and murderous and quite sinister, and yet her point about how awful it is that humans just want to destroy this beautiful thing is kind of the right one. She's got terrible means, but it's hard to disagree with her interpretation of it, I guess.
And then I guess the counterpoint to that is you've got the Robin Wright character, is it Lieutenant Joshi, who actually is very reasonable She's one of the more sympathetic characters in the movie, yet she wants to maintain the status quo. So they're very, very yin and yang as characters.
Well, even Kay doesn't really question it when she says, "You've got to hide this, you've got to bury it." He immediately is like, "Yeah." And even though it's such a revelation, it's like their first thought is to just bury it and keep everything the same. And God knows what will happen if they let it out. But then at the same time, you've got the replicants who obviously have known about this for a long, long time. They also have kept it quiet, but at the same time sound like they've been biding their time. Whereas we would imagine in our world that would be a huge story that wouldn't sit quietly and again would not necessarily be a negative thing.
Well, look at the sacrifice that Deckard has made to keep it secret.
Yeah, mooching about Vegas for 30 years.
Yeah.
He's got an endless supply of booze.
Just drinking whiskey.
And a huge dog, a radioactive dog.
And watch a lot of Elvis.
You'd go completely out of your mind trying to watch that Elvis show, wouldn't you, with all those glitches in it? Very frustrating.
So we talked about love and we talked a little bit about Neander Wallace. What do you think about sort of like Wallace's dreams for the future? Because he considers the replicants, he calls them like angels and he sees himself as like a god. What do you think of him as a character and Jared Leto's sort of portrayal of him?
I have issues. He's one of my least favourite things about the movie. I think he's more a series of characteristics than a character. And I think in the way that certainly Johnny Depp did early in his career, it's like, I'm a good looking guy. I want to get away from that and be a character actor. I think Jared Leto is really doing a similar sort of thing here. And I think he's a potentially really interesting character. And I know that Denis Villeneuve originally wanted David Bowie to play the role. That was his original idea. And he wanted that kind of rock star vibe. But I think this whole thing about this, I mean, he totally sees himself as a god, and he sees I think the replicants as his plaything. And that scene fairly early on where there's the replicant born and he just kills her. That's showing this guy. But I think by making him so, I guess, so mannered and over the top, it kind of stops him from being a character or anyone you can believe.
He's cartoonishly cruel, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there could have been a bit more there. I think obviously we side with the replicants and we empathise with the replicants for good reason. You're supposed to. But I can see a way that you could present that character as understandable, not empathising with them because he manufactures them and, sees them from that way. But yeah, to approach that one that's just been born out of the plastic bag and then just like slice her open, that level of cruelty cuts any kind of depth off for the character, really, doesn't it? He is just this maniacal villain.
Yeah, and I think he openly says at one point that all great empires have been built on slave labor or something. There's no doubt at all that he's got this kind of megalomaniac kind of conquering mentality.
He seems to have so much power as well in the society because he's the one who's providing all this tech and like he goes above the police. He doesn't quite own the police, but he's sort of like he's got tabs on them. So he's kind of like almost like a politician in this world. And it's very sort of like, obviously it's sort of Blade Runner is the start of cyberpunk and sort of all of those kind of themes are in there. But I find that like in dystopian fiction we've seen so far that there's always like the ruling class aren't necessarily always the politicians. They could be the people who have the most power, could be the companies, or they could be the media. So it's quite interesting seeing that here in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's hoovered up the archives of the Tyrell Corporation, and he's got and even things that happened before the blackout, which is another bit odd. It does seem to have that kind of kingpin style power, doesn't he? There, but he's. I find him not it's cartoonishly evil is the right way to say it. Even at the end when he kind of confronts Deckard, he's and he's got this sort of pain isn't the only option. I've also got pleasure, and he brings out Rachel. It's so kind of manipulative and a bit and the way that they then execute the Rachel clone, it does seem odd that he kind of talks about how he can't manufacture, replicants fast enough, but we see him kill 2 on screen, so he's not entirely logical guy.
Yeah, a management consultant would have a word with Wallace about how he's dealing with his stock.
So what about the sort of like the big mystery which you talked about throughout the a little bit throughout the conversation? So like the big mystery is of course like what's happened to Deckard's child, and how did you feel about sort of like how they reveal that and sort of like the pacing of that? Because I think like I didn't see it coming when I was watching it. I knew something was up, but when I first watched it, I couldn't quite place it. What did you guys think?
Yeah, it took me by surprise as well. 'Cause obviously I'd gone down that road where I thought it was Ryan Gosling's character. Yeah, to find out that obviously at the end that it wasn't him and that it was a woman, and then that we knew the woman, and then that Deckard was going to meet her. It was all, it was a surprise. And again, it's a great storytelling arc that kept us gripped right until the end.
Yeah, it came as a surprise to me as well. Although the more I think about it, does that mean that the person they've been searching for the whole time was working for Wallace all along? Is that's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah. I have to say, like, it took me by surprise, so I shouldn't be too critical of it, but this was one of the things that I didn't particularly like about the film, because I thought it was a little bit Scooby-Doo that the person we're searching for was like, well, it's kind of the only other character. We just talked to her briefly in the middle of the film. So like there aren't many other possibilities for who it could be. And it's like, well, it's the memory girl from halfway through in the film. And that, I don't mind it not being Gosling. I was fine with that. But that just, that felt like a Scooby-Doo reveal to me, unfortunately.
What's nice about it, though, is that if keeping this child secret is as important as is made out throughout the whole film, I think quite often you'll find a film that the scheme they've used isn't actually that good. It'll be easily solvable, whatever, but this is actually really clever and they've been really smart about it. And then the filmmakers kind of run with that, and this whole decoy plot with Kay, who's obviously looking for his own identity, and you're like, this is plausible. And then when you get to the end and you find out, oh, it is her. Yeah, it's a shock, but it's not like one of these things that comes at the end where it's just come from nowhere and it's not been set up at all. You kind of okay. And that whole thing that she has spent she spends her time locked away from the world. And actually that it all kind of tallies. It's like, yeah, okay, I like that. And I think it's a really, as Tanavi just said, it's a really clever bit of storytelling and sort of making a big mystery play out in a really good way.
There's also that line of dialogue that Frasier has where she says that we all thought we were the one, or something like that. You thought you were the one, we all did. So this decoy element actually works across all replicants after the point that she started working for the Wallace Corporation, because she could have been seeding real memories that she has, so that any replicant of approximately the right age could actually be a decoy for and Kay just stumbles into it by the events of the movie.
And I have to say as well, it's all worth it for that final shot. I think it's absolutely wonderful ending with where Harrison Ford walks in, he sees his daughter, and it just cuts. There's no effort to kind of show their meeting, their conversation. It's just the way that the original movie has that kind of ending with the door closing, or at least in the director's cut. It's a nice sort of, everything you need to know.
Yeah, I don't think it would have played out particularly well trying to have that like emotional scene, would it? I don't think it would add anything. And I don't know, there's talk of a sequel. I don't know if they're going to leave it another 30, 40 years, but if there or if there'll be a gap in the story. But I'm not jonesing to see any more interaction between Deckard and his daughter, because I just don't think it's going to play out in a very interesting way.
Ironically, we may have been quite lucky on this, that it perhaps didn't make as much money as they wanted it to. Obviously, if they've spent a lot of money on it, and I think if it had been a mega hit, there's no question they would have made a sequel. But actually, as I was saying about the first movie, it doesn't really need a follow-up. I mean, or if you do make a follow-up, you've got to be really, really smart about it. And it's not just a matter of saying, oh, this is Blade Runner 2079.
Well, as kind of Matt said, I sort of feel like if there was going to be another story told in that world, I don't necessarily need it to be about Deckard's family or whatever. I'm much more interested in what's going on with the replicant rebellion somewhere. I'd happily watch off-world stories about the new replicants and what they're up to, and be set in that universe, but not have to follow that same not have to follow the kind of family at the heart of it.
Yeah, because I think, like the original movie, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and they're mainly around the replicants. So that's really where it makes sense that the story would travel to, and they are really interesting. I really like Joy. I think Ana de Armas did a fantastic job in that. Slightly ironically, the most empathetic, kindest, most human character in there.
Well, I think this was her kind of breakout, wasn't it? Because I mean, obviously we've seen her since in Knives Out, and she's absolutely amazing in No Time to Die. But yeah, it's a really good performance.
There's great heartbreaking moments, and you were saying about how Ryan Gosling is perfect for this, of just being completely seemingly emotionless with these massive bursts of passion at just the right moment in his films. But yeah, some of his interactions with Joy are amazing. It's absolutely heartbreaking when I can't remember what she says to him, but he says, "You don't have to say that," when they're kind of embracing on the rooftop, and it's like, I as an audience member, I didn't doubt her sincerity in what she was saying, but he just dismisses any sincere feelings just outright. Like, that's really heartbreaking. And then obviously when she's stomped on and he's just staring at it, watching it happen. Yeah, just heartbreaking stuff. And yeah, she is the most humane, relatable character in the whole thing.
But the thing I found heartbreaking was the advert that Kay interacts with.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like, oh, so everything that she's been saying, is none of it real? Was it all just artificial? And then when you start thinking of it like that, it's like, oh, that makes it even more heartbreaking if none of that actually meant anything.
Oh, that's interesting. That wasn't my reaction to it. I thought it was heartbreaking, but I kind of thought he had a version of that. That's the advert, but he had developed a genuine relationship with a version of that, and he was just recognizing that genuine relationship is now gone, and he can't just go out and buy a new Joy because it will just be the default, like the hologram that talks to him, and he's lost all of that real connection that maybe he didn't appreciate when he was being dismissive on the rooftop.
Yeah, but the advert says she says what you want her to say, or words to that effect.
Sure, yeah.
So it's like, yeah. I mean, I'd rather have your viewpoint on it, Matt. I'd rather it be like a proper relationship.
It's classic Gosling. You don't know what's going on in there.
I think for me, it made sense that there was some detachment, because even when he's questioning his humanity, she is most definitely not human. And so it almost feels like it's, slightly odd if there was that real relationship love that we would recognize, because that is very human. And so to me, that almost felt like he was trying slightly to distance himself and remember that, she is essentially a program on a stick. But at the times when he needed it and she was there, you could just see that wealth of emotion from him.
I'm so happy when I'm with you.
You don't have to say that.
What a day, dude. You look lonely. I can fix that. You look like a good Joe.
This is a world where we know that AI is really complex and really, and really important. All the replicants are just artificial, but we know that Kay is capable of a kind of emotion. And although Joy, you assume that she comes out of a package with a certain number of default settings, the choice to take herself off the home network onto the thing where she could be destroyed. Siri or Alexa don't have the capacity to do that. Do you know what I mean? That was something that she chose to do, and I can't believe that's a default setting. Do you know what I mean? I think so.
It's just the algorithms. It's got a really good algorithm. It's learned what to say.
I think that recognition, that possible recognition, or wanting to distance himself from from the relationship. I think that's all captured in a very brief moment where Deckard has the showdown with Wallace, and Wallace is trying to make him doubt his own humanity and suggesting he might be a replicant to him, and he just says, I know what's real. I know what was real. So it's the lived experience for Deckard is clearly more important after 40 years than any questions about his biology. And I took the same for Kay, I guess, at that point.
But you don't find out if Deckard's a replicant, do you?
Well, good.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to have that question answered. Yeah, I mean, I think if you did find out one way or the other, it would ruin it. You need that mystique about it.
I mean, Ridley Scott's always said that he's a replicant. I mean, he's quite certain. But I think it's a weird one. I would never have twigged that when I first watched the director's cut. I mean, it wasn't a thing in the original version of the movie, but it's quite the sort of leap with the unicorn. Oh, well, there's a unicorn origami figure, and he has a unicorn dream. It's like, oh yeah, that means he's a robot.
He's got the glimmer in his eyes as well, hasn't he? Actually, I think, isn't there a nice callback? Doesn't Ryan Gosling's character say something like, "Oh, there's something in his eyes" or something at some point?
There are a few eye references.
Yeah, exactly.
In it.
And there's a scene in the original when Deckard is talking to Rachel, where you see in the background he's got the same reflection in his eyes as the artificial owl. So I always assumed that was the clue. Aren't we looking for the eyes? But
I don't. That's one of those things I don't really mind either way. I don't think it affects the story really either way. His relationship with Rachel is still the same. What's happened with his daughter is still the same. And actually, we don't really know if he knows that's, and which could affect. So I think this is a big mistake. Certainly, Star Wars and Marvel sometimes make this. We've got to answer every little question. If the Kessel Run is mentioned briefly in the original Star Wars, we need to show it in a movie, and you don't always need to do that. It was just that was someone writing a line.
It boils down to what Matt was saying, is that their humanity and their memory is more important than their biology. But then when I looked at this and I thought, well, Harrison Ford has clearly aged like a human. Right. So isn't that the answer?
No, we don't know about that, because in the original movie, Roy Batty is programmed to sort of expire after 5 years, isn't he? So.
And Deckard would have to be from the same run. That was the only problem I had with that. I've always been comfortable in the ambiguity, and I was very satisfied that after 30 years, Deckard seemed comfortable in the ambiguity of it as well, and that it was not addressed head on in this film. But that did stick in my head a little bit, that because when it was first announced and Harrison Ford was on the poster, one of the things that griped me was that, well, that sort of ruins the ambiguity, because if Harrison Ford's even alive in that universe, then he cannot be a replicant. But I don't know, I think they gloss over it a little bit, and I also think that there's some dialogue there that, like, he might be a special... Wallace implies that he's specially built to fall in love with Rachel, and therefore he may not be limited by whatever limited the Nexus 7s in the first one, I guess. There was enough for me to sort of not be too caught up on it.
In the original version of Blade Runner, the theatrical version, which probably isn't canon, who knows, when he's got the infamous voiceover at the end, he actually says, well, Rachel lived for another 20 or 30, I can't remember, 20 or 30 years, and it addresses that, because obviously that's a big thing in that one. The gaff line, it's too bad she won't live, but then again, who does? That's referring to the fact they don't know if she's going to expire. So there are obviously there is a question over how long they can live, and if Rachel was a special replicant, which it's always implied through that movie she is, then maybe she, her and Deckard didn't have that built in. And
she's very special. She gave birth, didn't she? So I think we can forgive that one on the aging, can't we?
Yeah, it's good they didn't digitally de-age him.
Oh, that would have been terrible. I'm so glad they didn't do
that. Oh, you wait till Indiana Jones 5, we'll be seeing a lot of that, I'm sure.
Excellent. Well, I think that wraps it up for Blade Runner. Guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you about these two films. So as we are doing Dystopia this series, are there any other big dystopian films you think we should cover along the way?
I mentioned this at the top of our chat, but I've got a lot of time for Children of Men. Don't know if that's been something you've covered already, but I throw that into the ring as something to consider.
Fantastic. Great one.
I'm going to say a couple. First of all, Brazil. It's completely out of time. Just the mixture of future, past, typewriters with magnifying things. Absolutely brilliant. And a film that is becoming more and more prescient by the year, Idiocracy. Yes. The Mike Judge film. At the time, I kind of didn't think it was all that, but it's a very clever idea. Basically, the descent of the human race into stupidity, and actually, very sophisticated science fiction, sort of masquerading as a dumb, sort of gross out movie. So I think there's a lot to talk about in that one.
Tanavi, any recommendations?
The only other one I sort of was going to mention was WALL-E.
One of my absolute favourites, WALL-E. But we already did it in our AI series because I couldn't wait, and I had to get it on the podcast as soon as possible.
Good choice.
Fair enough.
Good choice.
Yeah.
So the podcast is Robby the Robot's Waiting, which people can find on their podcast apps, of course. But where can people find you on social media if they want to give you a follow?
Well, we're on Twitter as Robby Sci-Fi. At Robby Sci-Fi. There's also a website, robbysci-fi.com. There's a Facebook page too. Again, I think that's just Robby Sci-Fi on Facebook.
And Robby spelt with a Y.
It's Robby spelt with a Y, like the robot from Forbidden Planet.
Brilliant. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so glad we were able to get all of those guys on the podcast. I mean, it was a lot of people for one podcast episode, but an amazing chat.
Hey, it was crowded in this room. I'm just kidding. We do it all remotely these days. Yeah, it was so much fun to talk to Dave Tanavi and Richard. That was great. Thank you again to the Robby the Robot's Waiting hosts for joining us.
Yes, and remember, you can always check out their podcast. If you search them in your podcast app of choice, you'll be able to find them up on there. It's a great one.
But what did we learn about the state of American culture and American landscapes in dystopian societies by looking at these two films?
I mean, they either become massive prisons or nuclear fallout areas like Las Vegas, or just like murky dystopian cities, as you saw with like the main city of LA in Blade Runner.
Yeah, and you're making it sound bad, James, but it looks really cool.
I mean, you've got all the flying cars, and I don't know if Escape from New York made it look that cool to live in.
Not to live in, no.
I wouldn't want to live in that prison in New York.
Cool to watch.
Yeah, cool. I feel like, watching Snake Plissken is pretty cool.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to live in the irradiated wastelands of Las Vegas either, but damn, it looks nice.
I feel like a lot of the people in these two films just didn't have like real jobs though. I mean, Kurt Russell is just thrown into a prison. He was going to go to prison anyway. And then, I suppose Ryan Gosling is a Blade Runner, but Harrison Ford is retired. He's sort of like, he's just hanging around doing what he wants. Like, the thing I want to know is how you balance your work and personal life in a dystopia.
Yeah, and how do you get by as just a regular working schlub when the world's starting to go to pot and turning into a dystopia? So next week we're going to be looking at that work-life balance in dystopian worlds. And what are the two films we've got lined up for that, James?
We've got a couple of 80s films next week. We are looking at Repo Man from 1984, which I've never seen.
Oh, exciting. I'm excited for you to see that because I've seen that a few times and I love that film. It's very strange, very fun. I won't spoil it. Just go in with an open mind and enjoy the weirdness.
Yes, and speaking of weirdness, the other film we're covering is Brazil from 1985. Another Terry Gilliam film on the podcast. It's mad. It's great. I'm looking forward to chatting about it.
Yeah, excited to go back to classic Terry Gilliam. We've done a few Gilliam films. We've done 12 Monkeys in our time travel series, of course, and we looked at The Zero Theorem, his more recent one in this little collection of films, along with 12 Monkeys in Brazil.
Yeah, he's definitely got a handle for sci-fi, hasn't he? And yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting about Brazil because it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember a lot of crazy shit happening in that film.
Me too. It's a great movie though, so very excited to have an excuse to watch that again. Not that I need one. But anyway, in the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, you can always find us on social media. If you search for Journey Through Sci-Fi on your social media app of choice, we'll probably be there. Or you can send us an email at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com.
We also have a website. You can come on there and sort of see the rest of the episodes that we put out previously. All that kind of stuff is up there, so feel free to do that. And of course, if you want to support the show, you can also join our Patreon. So if you join our Patreon, sign up to the £4 tier, you'll get access to bonus episodes and extra content.
If you want to support the show but you don't want to join our Patreon, that's absolutely fine. You can leave us a nice review. That's always really helpful. If you leave us a 5-star review with a comment, that really helps. So why don't you leave us that review, and in the comment let us know which American city you'd like to visit in a dystopia. Is that too close to the bone? Is that too realistic? I don't know.
I think that's fine. We're not quite there yet, are we, in terms of dystopias?
But that's all we've got time for this week anyway. Join us next time, folks.